Hey friends, welcome back. This is episode 114 and we're going to talk about estrogen.
Excellent. So we've talked about hormones in the past, right? We've talked about neurotransmitters. We've talked about cortisol and stress. And we're going to do estrogen this episode and progesterone next episode. But what I really wanted to focus on is how estrogen affects our neurotransmitters, how estrogen affects our mood, right? Because a lot of women experience this, right? They think that I had two women come in this week who said, I feel like I'm going psycho and my husband thinks I'm going psycho. Can you help me? And so I'm like, well, what does that mean? But it's always around our periods, right? And so we know that there's that relationship between our estrogen and our neurotransmitters. And we've talked about estrogen and cortisol, but I really wanted to highlight a couple of studies and help to understand the relationship between estrogen and like our dopamine and our serotonin. Okay, so I'm trying to kind of bring that back together kind of full circle. So when I first started doing research, I wanted to try and figure out that relationship. We started down the dopamine trail, right? So we just talked about dopamine, norepinephrine, and epinephrine last episode. So estrogen, when we think about estrogen often comes from the ovaries, right? In women. For folks who've had their ovaries removed, our body still produces estrogen, and we actually produce estrogen from our fat cells. So that's why in men also have estrogen levels, and they often come from their fat cells in men. Yeah, because men don't have ovaries.
Yeah.
But estrogen, when our body releases estrogen, not only do we have estrogen receptors in our like uterus and our ovaries, but we also in our breasts, we also have estrogen receptors in our brain. Okay, so what that means was as our estrogen is circulating in that cyclic fashion, it affects our brain and our mood. So one of the first, not first, but there's a study that shows how when estrogen is higher in that follicular phase, which is usually day 1 to about 14, so that from before ovulation, estrogen is kind of the predominant player, and then progesterone is the predominant player in the luteal phase, the second half, from ovulation to when your period starts. So that first half, what they've seen is our dopamine, as our estrogen is increasing, often our dopamine increases. Okay. So how that translates is then our reward, dopamine's our reward molecule. So they've found that in women, and they've also done this in female mice, is that in that follicular phase, that first 2 weeks before ovulation, they're often participating in more dopamine rewarding activities. So what they were looking at in the study is they were looking at relationship to food, that food was increasing their dopamine more, amphetamines were increasing their dopamine more, and the use of cocaine was increasing that dopamine more when the higher estrogen levels were circulating in our blood. Versus the second half of the cycle, that what we call the luteal phase, from day 14, 16 to 28, 30, we have less estrogen floating around in our bloodstream. So then our reward, that dopamine pathway is a little bit like the threshold's a little bit higher, right, if you will. So women or female rats were not responding to those stimuli as much as they were the first half of the cycle. Does that make sense? Yeah. So oftentimes, because of that relationship, we can see how our mood changes, right? Because that dopamine is our reward, it's often also known as kind of that joyful neurotransmitters. So the idea is, as our estrogen is higher, right, we're a little bit more joyful the first half of the cycle, and then the second half of the cycle that could change for folks depending on where their estrogen levels are, right? So then if we look at the next pathway with serotonin, there's a lot more involved in the serotonin pathway, because serotonin is not just in our brain, but we also have serotonin that addresses our gut health, right? How well we digest things. It affects our sleep patterns. It affects some of the regulatory patterns in our brain, like our body temperature regulation, things like what's my other note? Oh, hunger. And then of course with estrogen, our libido.
Mhm.
So what they looked at, the relationship between estrogen and serotonin, was that some of the studies that really kind of highlighted some of this was around menopausal women.
Mhm.
So when women go into menopause, we know that their estrogen is going to decrease. Right. And so the original theory was, okay, well, when women they're seeing more and more menopausal women and higher rates of depression.
Mhm.
So they're like, okay, well, if we know estrogen is decreasing, and this depression, if it's associated with that estrogen, well, can't we just give these women estrogen and they'll be okay,
Mhm.
right? Was the original theory of the study. And so they were trying to, make those relationships. So what they found was across the board, the lower the estrogen levels, the more depression,
Okay.
the more anxiety, the more issues with memory and learning
Mhm.
because of that lower serotonin.
Mhm.
You could also see lower estrogen and lower serotonin, so that affects your digestion. So then you see things like nausea, right? Like changes in bowel movements. You see things like insomnia or sleep disorders, all because that serotonin is lower,
Mhm.
since it mirrors, if you will, estrogen.
Yeah.
So then I started looking, like I went down the rabbit hole and was like, well, what about folks that are not menopausal, but people who experience PMDD or premenstrual something dysphoria disorder, mood dysphoria disorder.
Premenstrual mood disorder.
I think that's what it's called. That's not right.
I'll look up.
As I say, we'll have to look that one up. But when people get diagnosed with PMDD, what they're experiencing, right, is really intense, severe PMS symptoms. So
Okay.
often it comes before their period. They get the severe depression or anxiety. They start to experience a lot of like pain. They can also notice it's usually mood issues. And it usually comes every premenstrual dysphoric disorder. Oh, I put too many M's in there. PMDD.
Yeah.
In my mind, I was trying to read PMMDD. So one of the things that I read is it was like, oh, the cause is unknown. And I was like, is really the cause unknown? And so you start thinking about it and trying to put that piece of the puzzle together. Well, if all of those symptoms can be explained by a decrease in serotonin,
Mhm.
then again, it's an imbalance in that estrogen, right?
Mhm.
Which to address PMDD, really all they have are antidepressants and birth control.
Right.
So then we're back to, right, like our original
Symptom management, yeah.
issue of symptom management. So we're trying to not only just balance out the neurotransmitters, that serotonin, but if it's related, if you don't address that relationship to estrogen and don't address the imbalance in estrogen, you're not going to be getting to that root cause of the mood changes.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I don't even know that I'd necessarily, like PMDD, but like classify them as a mood disorder, but just those mood changes that we experience with our periods on a regular basis, whether you are menstruating, whether you're perimenopausal or menopausal, if we're not addressing those hormones and how they're supposed to change, it's going to create changes in our neurotransmitters.
Mhm.
Yeah. So the reason why I wanted to highlight that is because I wanted to explain that half of the circle to show, or the cycle to show how interrelated our hormones are estrogen is the biggest player. We'll talk about progesterone next time, but in those neurotransmitters. So like when in the New Beginnings program, when we look at the neurotransmitters, the adrenals and the hormones, you can see that relationship. But I want people to understand how what they're experiencing makes sense if you look at it from a hormone or a neurotransmitter perspective, because they are directly related to one another. Yeah, just based on what's how much of that hormone's available that's influencing how our brain is producing those neurotransmitters. Yeah.
And when you said that, I had a thought like, oh, well, we just need to be like, as a society, testing people, their hormones and their neurotransmitters, balancing those out, right? Root cause, balancing them out. And then mental health would get better. But then I was like, oh, wait, no. Like, if we have these beliefs and thoughts that are not serving us and we're looping them, we're still going to end up right back where we are, because that also impacts what chemicals we produce.
Exactly.
You have to address both.
Yeah, you can't just do one without the other. If you just address one, like you just address the hormones, great. You can still experience an improvement, but it may not be sustainable. Or you may only be addressing like a third of the pie. And so it's like, you're going to feel better, you're going to feel less crummy, but you're not going to be 100%, right, if you're not addressing all of the pieces.
So, and then I had another question for you. So what we all as females, like, we're all going to go through menopause. So what does that mean then? Like, I'm going to lose my estrogen. So is it just kind of like this? Well, you're just gonna have to suffer through these it's not available for your neurotransmitters. Just tough it out until you die.
So that's a great question. No. So even though we see that as the trend, if we balance out those hormones before perimenopause or menopause, our body has, so like I said, we also make estrogen from our fat cells, right? But our body has built in adaptations that as we, go through changes in our hormones, you will still have the opportunity to make adequate amounts of serotonin. Okay. But it's if your hormones are balanced before you hit menopause. Okay. So for example, if your body's used to a higher level of estrogen and we don't address that before you hit menopause, and all of a sudden you've got this like huge dip, you're going to experience changes in your neurotransmitters. Right. But if we balance that out to be like, okay, your body's producing adequate amounts of estrogen to match your progesterone, then it's going to be a much easier transition. And if we're optimizing the serotonin side, or your dopamine, your neurotransmitter side, then there's going to be a flux, but it's not going to be like this huge devastating, oh, now we're in like depression, major depressive disorder, because that change was more gradual instead of this huge, like you just fell off a cliff. So it's very different. Our body adjusts, right? I mean, there are plenty of 50, 60, 70, 80, 90-year-old women who don't have issues with depression. Right. Is that our body adapts over time. That's the way that we are built. But if you optimize those hormones first, then it's not a cliff. It's more this gradual, like, hey, just walk it down the hill.
I wonder if that's it. So I know that estrogen is for females produced in ovaries and fat cells. So I wonder if it's like a adaptation for us as females, because a lot of women talk about struggling with their weight. And I wonder if that's the body's way of like, hey, I've got to hold on to weight and gain some fat, because ovaries are no longer going to produce estrogen. So I'm going to need the fat cells then to start taking over. So I need some more fat cells to produce.
Yes, especially around menopause. Yeah, when people say, oh gosh, like I feel like I've gained weight, and maybe it's not weight on the scale, maybe it's how their body's redistributing the weight, where they may notice a little bit more like abdominal fat. That's the body's mechanism to say, okay, I know that I'm not going to be producing as much estrogen from these ovaries. You're exactly right.
So genius.
Yeah. It's a very, to me, awe-inspiring design. Yeah. Our body, because we have all these built-in mechanisms. But yeah, you're exactly right. That's why usually when folks it's usually sort of that initial menopause shift where they start to see that body composition change. And that doesn't mean that you can't address it, right? Or that you can't tone that back. It's just that that's the natural mechanism. We've got to find other ways to, optimize and tone so that your body doesn't feel like it's starving for estrogen because you've lost more fat.
Yeah. Cool. Anything else?
I think hopefully that makes sense.
So ladies, you're not crazy.
No, you are not.
No. It's just your estrogen is impacting your brain and your neurotransmitters. And I mean, we all know, I don't think women are educated about our cycles.
Yes. Yeah.
But if you are educated, like first half,
Mhm.
it's this like rise of estrogen, and then it drops, and our progesterone starts rising and then dropping.
Yes.
And it impacts our brain and the neurotransmitters. And so then those are going to impact our mood.
Mhm. Yeah.
And probably, I think, certain thought pathways.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think we'll explore that even more when we get into progesterone. Yeah. I did want to give one little bit extra piece of information, is that because I think a lot of women suspect that they have hormone imbalances, right? And they're reaching out and looking for support. And so oftentimes these are, folks will come to me because they have gone to a gynecologist and they've had labs drawn. Sometimes chiropractors are drawing these labs, I've noticed. And they get blood serum labs for hormones, and they come back and the doctor says everything's fine. Your hormones are fine. Your hormones are fine. And then sometimes some folks will process that as, great, I am crazy. It's not my hormones. I'm crazy. It's like, okay, that wasn't really very helpful for them to say that. It does make a difference when you have your hormones drawn. Okay. So keep this in mind. If you're going to a gynecologist to get blood labs drawn to test your hormones, it's more data, but I want you to mark on the calendar what day of your cycle that was. Because there is a chart on everybody's labs that'll tell you, what the range should be for the follicular phase, for the luteal phase of menopause or post-menopause. Oftentimes docs don't look at that, or they don't explain, and they'll say, oh, your labs are normal, because they won't get flagged. But if you know what part of your cycle you had your labs drawn and you're off, it's not going to get flagged because they don't write that down when you had your labs drawn. You have to keep that information and compare those two things when you get your labs back. So keep that in mind if you've been told, oh, your labs are fine, your hormones are fine, they're not the problem. And then reach out to us and let us help run some urine labs. Help us, let us help you address that relationship and that imbalance to address your root cause.
Which just, I mean, it's like the perfect opportunity to be like, that's what makes our program so amazing and so unique. Is we are addressing all of this. Right? We're trying to optimize your life by helping you reach your goals and your dreams. That's always my agenda. That's who I am as a coach, is I want to help you. What's your dreams? What's your goals? We're getting there, and we're getting there faster. We're optimizing this, right? But we're also optimizing how you feel and how your brain works. Because we are testing this. We're testing your neurotransmitters. We're testing your hormones. we're getting to the root cause, we're addressing this so you can A, feel better, but B, access the moods, emotions, and thoughts you need to, and have all the chemicals aligned to allow you to access those things. It's not like you're running uphill with a weighted vest on. Like we're taking the vest on, right? They're taking the vest off of you, right?
Yeah.
Lowering the incline, making it so much easier for you to just like rock it off.
Exactly. I think, that's why I really like our program too, is because it's a whole person, it's a holistic approach. But when we say that, these are all the pieces that are involved to help, rocket you forward. Because when you understand that relationship between those neurotransmitters, those hormones, and those adrenals, and you see like where you're at, and then understand like, oh, what thoughts and belief patterns help me be where I'm at, and what can I do to be in a different place, to make those changes and to accomplish those goals and dreams that I want. That's powerful.
So there was, and I was going to side note, like you said, a lot of people come do this, and I love when they go to their conventional, and this is the answer. Well, just give you some testosterone.
Oh, yes.
I'm like, that is not the problem.
Yes, so that's very big right now, and it kind of has been picking up speed in the last few years. Bioidentical hormones and testosterone, and so bioidentical hormones is still along the lines of estrogen and testosterone, and a lot of people are like, they make it sound great. They're like, it's bioidentical, it's safe, it's natural, it's just like as if it would have come from your own body. But your body's not producing it for whatever reason. So they do injections, pellets, creams of bioidentical hormones, and people they feel good, right? Well, they feel good because you're increasing your estrogen and testosterone, which are playing on your dopamine and your serotonin neurotransmitters. Right? The challenge is what happens when either you can't afford the testosterone shots or the pellets anymore, or two, you start getting the side effects where you have like hair growing in places most women prefer not to have.
Right.
Or you get the anger, irritability that your partner is like, oh no, this isn't working anymore. Then what? Then what are their options? Right. Nobody wants to go back to feeling crummy. Right. They're scared to death. Oh, if I stop this, I couldn't function before. I don't want to go back to that. Right. Yeah. So it's hard. So I'm not an advocate of the testosterone and estrogen, right? Because again, we're not getting to the root cause, right? Mm-hmm. Like I get it. Sometimes folks need, you want to feel better. We need to feel better to function for our job, for our family, right? For our business to get to be productive. Yeah. But if you want a long-lasting, sustainable way, you've got to work with your body instead of hijacking things. Yep. Yeah. Yep. For sure.
Beautiful. So reach out, ladies.
Yes, please.
Like if you are not feeling well, you're not crazy again.
No.
Right. There are other alternatives. We've already talked about those in lots of episodes, but if you really do want to feel better in a sustainable way, like we're talking, this is a long-term game, not a quick fix, long-term game in terms of like, we care about your health now and your health, the quality of your life for the rest of your life.
Exactly.
It's an investment. You're going to invest in you, right? Like you got to invest in like taking charge of your health, asking for what you need. Not just taking the first answer, right? Like go do the legwork, find a naturopathic doctor. If you don't want to work with Dr. Carmen, you don't want to work with me, like find someone else, because there are answers out there that are sustainable and health promoting, not symptom management.
Exactly. Exactly.
All right, my soapbox. Have a good day.
Thanks.